Hi, my name's John Cordy and I'm a fan of the Helix. In this little video I just wanted to kind of go over some of the things that I think are really cool about the Helix, and there's some other videos which I'll kind of point you in the direction of which I think are really useful in terms of understanding the history of the Line 6 Helix. There's actually a video from Line 6 where Eric Klein talks about the development of the Helix all the way as far back as sort of 2008, and even back then apparently Line 6 were working on the idea of floor modeler which had a touch screen, which is kind of ironic given what was actually released in 2021. Obviously in 2021 each of us have seen stuff to do with the quad cortex, you can see the kind of effect that Line 6 have had in the modelling world. Certainly the interface of the quad cortex owes a substantial debt to this way of doing things, which was kind of new, pioneered by Line 6 I guess you could say. So I'm a fan of it. You can look back at kind of the early designs of the Helix, and I think this touchscreen idea ended up looking quite a bit like what you might have seen with the headrush stuff, and I think that's interesting as well. What I think works really nicely, and I can't really see going without this if I was to put everything in a floor modeler that I wanted for like touring or gigging or whatever. Having the scribble strips, once you've actually had them, I find it a bit difficult to go back to not having them, and I'd put those to me higher in a feature list than something like a touchscreen. I find that using the joysticks and all of that stuff works really nicely, but having the scribble strips really does kind of make things incredibly useful when you're trying to navigate the thing and trying to play with the thing, and you know, things like this where you've got immediately above the button what the function is. I think that's super useful, and having labels above the button that you're about to press. And I guess this is the kind of stuff that we'd see from Rocktron and people like that. Scribble strips were normally kind of things that were associated with expensive MIDI controllers and that sort of stuff. I guess that's where Line 6 kind of drew that inspiration from, if I had to assume. Now it's interesting to note where things started off with the Helix. I've used the Wayback Machine and I've gone back and looked through some firmware and release notes and all this sort of stuff, and as far as I can tell, the Helix initially shipped with 45 amp models, 70 effects, 16 mics, and I think 30 cabs. And this has increased over the years as they've continued to ramp these updates, which have started to come at quite a pace now, and this is something that I find really interesting about the modeler world. I think the more successful modeling companies have been able to engineer these ongoing updates, and it kind of really brings freshness to a device. Even though this is now over 5 years old as a product, it still feels pretty new, and that's because kind of a couple of weeks ago they brought forward another update with significant things that, as a guitarist, and you know, we all suffer from this kind of gear acquisition stuff, in the digital world they can kind of offer these free updates which satiate that a little bit and also give you new ways to be creative. So that's something that's been really cool about the Line 6 Helix, is the amount of updates and the significance of updates. I think Snapshots came out in 2016, and that was this really powerful way of changing parameters within the models, and I really love that, and that's a feature that I use all the time. And so things like that really meaningfully change the way the actual Helix works after release. Soon after release actually, you know, only sort of a year after it was initially announced, they introduced Snapshots, which as a concept are really powerful. So I think it's definitely possible for devices like the Helix to get better over time, and significantly better over time. I don't know if that's always the case. I know Fractal have made significant updates to most of their modelers over time until a certain stage when they phase it out and stop supporting it, but I think that's quite a window of time that they continue to roll out those updates for. So I think that's become the sort of benchmark, and also this as a user interface has clearly become something that other people are paying attention to and are taking influence from. And so it's kind of interesting to see maybe what Line 6 might do next, if there is going to be a new Helix or whatever. It's also interesting to go further back and say even as far back as sort of 2008, and I think there was the Stagescape that they brought out in 2011, 2012, which had a touchscreen, and it looks pretty much like what we've started to see now in the guitar world, you know, with the quad cortex doing things with that EQ. It looks awfully familiar, but sort of 8-9 years later. So yeah, I just wanted to put together a tiny little video just exploring some of the fun stuff about the Helix and where it's moved from the past and where it's at now. And I don't know, what's the future going to be like for the Helix? Not sure. Maybe the next thing that's going to get some sort of revamp might be the cab block. I think that seems to be the only thing that hasn't had a significant update since the initial release. So if you look at the numbers that have moved, you know, there's more amps, there's more effects, there's been UI changes and different features added. The number of mics has stayed the same, so maybe that's an area that they're going to be looking at in the future potentially. In terms of life for the gigging musician, I feel like the Helix has still got plenty of life in it, and particularly if you can get your hands on a used unit, I think they're incredible value even still today. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but maybe you feel similarly. Let me know if there's stuff that you're still really enjoying about the Helix, or bits and pieces that maybe you could let me know your most significant update for the Helix that you've enjoyed over the years. I came on board after the snapshots were already there, so they weren't significant for me in the way that they would have been for people that had the Helix pre-snapshot, if that makes sense, but they are significant as someone who came to the Helix world and discovered snapshots in that way. What's the kind of features that you really dig? Be interested to know. Thank you for stopping by. If you want to like and subscribe, you could. And all those tones at the start you'll find in my folder if you want them. Cheers.